everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Side. So this looks a little different than usual because Eugene is missing. In his place today, we have guest hosting Kei Pritsker of Breakthrough News. You all know and love him, and if you don't, here he is, and you should love him. Hello, Kei. Thank you for guest hosting today.
Hey, Rania. Hello, YouTubers. It's good to be here. I think this is my second run. Hopefully not my last, but good to be here today. Please keep me on. Yeah.
All right. So basically, if you guys want Kei to live after this episode, you need to make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode. It not only helps us boost us in the algorithm, it helps us from killing off a character that is Kei Pritsker on this week's episode of the Freedom Side Live. But no, I do want to just reiterate, please do like, subscribe, and share this episode. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Because we started a little late, I want to get to our first guest. But before I do, I just want to quickly just remind everyone that we are an independent media outlet. And in order to continue to produce all of the excellent news coverage that we bring you here from Breakthrough News, we need your support. So if you are able to, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you can contribute to independent media that helps inform people about how terrible capitalism and empire are against the tsunami of corporate media that lies the other way. So, with all that said, we've got a great show for you today covering lots of topics. I'm just going to jump right into our first guest. We have with us Glenn Diesen. He's professor at the University of South-Eastern Norway and author of The Ukraine War and Eurasian World Order. Glenn, welcome back to the Freedom Side Live.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
Well, it's our pleasure. And, I think there's a lot to talk about because we have this upcoming meeting, I believe, tomorrow between Trump and Putin in Alaska. It's pretty much dominating the news at the moment. There's also talks that Ukrainian President Zelensky was reportedly not invited to this meeting. This is pretty high stakes, right? Or is it just political theater? Can you basically just kind of lay out what's going on this weekend and what you think we can expect from this meeting?
Well, you mentioned Zelensky not being invited, and this is by many or seen as some kind of a scandal, but it depends how you see this conflict. It's often sold to the public as merely a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. However, I think it's more accurate to define it as a conflict between NATO and Russia being played out in Ukraine. So it kind of makes sense for the two big players, that is United States and Russia, to more or less reach a common understanding before they begin to bring in Zelensky or the Europeans. So this kind of makes sense. But no, with this meeting in Alaska, I think it took everyone by surprise because people they hadn't talked about it. It's unclear what's been done behind the scenes. And again, the messaging, especially from Washington, has been very mixed. Keep in mind that only a week ago, Trump was talking about an unconditional ceasefire, and he threatened Russia with sending weapons and heavy sanctions. So all of this if they did not bend to his demands. And the Russians didn't even bother answering this because this is not going to happen. So suddenly now we're having a summit, and from the Russian side, usually I would be very skeptical, but from the Russian side, Ushakov, one of the aides to the Kremlin, said that the Americans have put forth a proposal which seems acceptable. So it appears that something has been discussed behind the scenes. But my optimism is limited. But at least this is good news that the American and Russian president are meeting after more than 3.5 years of boycotting diplomacy.
Yeah, Donald Trump has really always tried to frame himself as a peacemaker, a deal maker, someone who's going to bring peace to the world. And when he first got elected in 2024, he was talking about how he's going to bring peace to the region and how, well his talks with Putin are going, phone calls. And now he's, been threatening these severe consequences. He's really sort of changed his tone, and there's been this sort of rush to, really pressure Putin Why do you think that is? Do you see it as sort of a switch in his rhetoric?
Well, I can come up with two possible explanations. One is that he has to appease the more hawkish elements within Washington. Keep in mind that not everyone in Washington is happy about trying to make a peace with the Russians. And indeed, he has to also consider the Zelensky and also the Europeans, because they also don't want an end to this war. They want to keep the war going. So I guess being a bit hawkish is good to well, prevent too much resistance. Um, Otherwise, he might not understand the conflict properly. Because yeah, only a week ago well, still he speaks about this as a Russia-Ukraine war, and he presents himself as this mediator, but at the same time he argues that this is Biden's war. So it's unclear how he sees America's role in this war. Indeed, on two occasions he recognized that the war began because of NATO expansion. Now, this has been a very important recognition, because if you can identify why the war began, then you can begin to look for the right solution. So, and if he does recognize that this is the problem of NATO expansion, then of course restoring Ukraine's neutrality would have to be at the foundation of any peace deal. But again, it's unclear why he suddenly shifted from this recognition. Keep in mind that back in February, Hegseth said, there will have to be some recognition that NATO's not going to expand, and also we need territorial concessions. So the idea that he now wanted a unconditional ceasefire, I have a hard time believing he simply forgot about what he had said only a few weeks earlier. So I do think there's perhaps this might reflect some of the power struggle within the US and the political West itself.
Glenn, I'm curious, I've been watching the mainstream media and the way that they've been framing this upcoming meeting. And they're, of course, very upset about it, because they tend to get very upset by any measure of diplomacy when it comes to this war between Russia and Ukraine that the West has been, fueling by continuing to funnel weapons into Ukraine. But they're framing this as a win for a kind of like preemptive win for Putin. They're framing Vladimir Putin as coming as exuding confidence and wanting to attach, economic relations into these talks, like trade talks, into this diplomacy about Ukraine, and how it puts, the U.S. and the West on the back foot. I mean, when you see the mainstream media coverage of this, is there any reality to the way that they're seeing this, or is it just, completely out of whack?
Well, I do think that Putin is feeling confident. They're winning the war. This is a war of attrition. Often people just look at territorial changes, but in a war of attrition, you don't go for the territory right away when you have a heavily defended defensive lines. So instead, what you do in a war of attrition, you destroy the enemy, and then you can take the territory. And that's what you see now. The Russians are moving faster and faster forward. They're entering this fortified defensive lines of the Ukrainians. Some of them are not even manned anymore because of the destruction they have leveled against them. So again, they're winning the war. There's nothing really. The NATO doesn't really have that much more weapons to send. Trump, of course, threatened more sanctions, and secondary sanctions. But the Chinese and Indians already said they're not going to abide by this anyway. So I think he comes very confident into this. But this being said, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where one side wins and the other one loses. There's the United States and Russia. They don't really need to have this ongoing conflict, and this seems to be something that Trump recognized as well. I think initially he was talking more in the line of the Kissinger concern that China and Russia were being pushed too close together. But I think on a wider scenario, it's he also might recognize that the past century of conflict between the United States and Russia, it doesn't really need to happen. There's not that many conflicting interests. It is possible to have a functional relationship. And I think that's actually the main thing he wants out of Alaska. They want to have a functional bilateral relation between the US and Russia, but it's not possible to get done because the Ukraine war hangs over, and it well can veto any form of cooperation. But this is something all sides can benefit from. Ukraine is not benefiting; they're being destroyed every day. They're losing more men, more territory, and their ability to recover is reduced. Europe is becoming more destabilized. Who this could be yeah, a mutual beneficial meeting. So but again, this is how we talk these days. It's well, we usually say if you have a policy suggestion, well, that's probably what Putin wants. Wonderful. You should try to accommodate the security concerns of your opponents. This idea that if we just put our military closer and closer to the Russian borders, this will be source of peace and stability. It's nonsense. It instigates security competition. If you want actual peace, you have to reduce the security competition. You have to also take into account the security concerns of your opponents. If you can do this, then you can have the indivisible security in which the security of both sides is elevated. So it's a very Cold War mentality. But it does dominate not just in the United States but also in Europe.
If there is no resolution reached, and if things sort of spiral, and Donald Trump is forced to resort to, these severe consequences, what kind of options is he looking at? What kind of things could he do? And what could be the consequences of any of those penalties on Russia?
I don't think nothing really. Again, Biden complained at the end of his term that they had to send cluster ammunition, other illegal weapons, because they were lacking artillery shells. Again, this is not a big secret anymore that we don't have that many weapons to send. Everyone is also recognizing that the Ukrainian army is now very much destroyed and depleted. They're trying to fill up the ranks with very forceful recruitment, but this only put a huge spike in desertion. So things aren't going well. This is well known, and there's not much that can be done. And also this massive pressure Trump put on China and India to stop trading with Russia as a form of economic pressure. All it did was make the Indians very angry, and they've been desperate to have a very pro-American foreign policy. But nonetheless, they're not gonna give up their sovereignty and dignity and have their foreign trade relations dependent on what Washington dictates to them. So they said, no, we're going to continue trading with Russia, and now they also seem to be trying to make a bit more friends with China. So if the problem in the past was pushing the Chinese and Russians together, now they succeeded in doing the same with the Indians. So I think the pressure tactics have exhausted themselves. So there's not much anymore that Trump can do. I've read all these headlines. Putin has to be careful so it doesn't anger Trump. I think this works against the Europeans, who are now very committed bootlickers every time Trump wags his finger. But you're not going to see this coming from the other great powers, be it the Russians, the Chinese, or the Indians.
Last thing I want to ask you about, and that is, we're almost 2 years into this horrific genocide in Gaza, right? And I'm just curious if that has impacted in any way these other arenas of war, including what we're witnessing with Russia, Ukraine. I mean, perhaps there's no connection there, but in some ways, I mean, it's laughable anything that Western leaders have to say about Russia's conduct in Ukraine as they supply Israel with every weapon they want to basically annihilate a civilian population in Gaza.
Well, I think the genocide in Gaza has been very devastating for the West's reputation around the world, because all these decades of lecturing other countries about human rights and it sort of went out the window when we're now complicit in the genocide. But in terms of being connected to the war in Ukraine, I think perhaps it shook the Moscow's assumptions about Trump, because they thought, maybe he's different. He wants peace. He's been talking for years about avoiding this forever wars, get out of the Middle East and Europe, and they thought this is someone we can work with. And then, of course, Trump comes along and says he's going to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza and make it into some French Riviera. It's very strange to see. And if you can also extend on the wider Middle East, when he negotiated with the Iranians, he said, well, we're very close to a deal, And in reality, it was just a ploy to have the Iranians to lower their guard. So, they had plans in advance to do a decapitation strike on the Iranians while they were negotiating. So I think all of this has impacted the Russians to some extent, that they're now thinking, that they're less trust, that whatever they agree with Trump, it might not be worth the paper it's written on. And this is very bad news for Ukraine, because the main thing the Russians are worried about is NATO creeping up on its borders. It doesn't want NATO in Ukraine. Now, if you sign a deal with NATO saying neutrality, okay, that solves the problem. But if you don't if you don't trust that the other side will live up to this deal, you want a permanent solution. And the only permanent solution is you strip your Ukraine of the territories which you can't accept being used against you in the future. So it creates an incentive for Russia to annex more territories, simply in the fear that at least then it won't end up in the hands of NATO. So then, especially focusing on the coastline along the Baltic Sea, and again, this is going to destroy Ukraine and make it very difficult for it to ever recover.
Well, we really appreciate your analysis, and hope to have you on again soon to discuss what is likely to be a major news story all throughout the weekend. Professor Glenn Diesen, thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side Live.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you.
Well, Kei, as we finish in one part of the world, we're going to move to another part of the world, and that is the one that you are in. Because in the United States right now, there are some crazy things happening on the ground recently in Washington, D.C., with Trump basically calling in the military. So to discuss that and more, we are thrilled to be joined by Mara Verheyden-Hilliard, a constitutional rights litigator and co-founder and executive director of the Partnership for the Civil Justice Fund. Mara, welcome to the Freedom Side Live.
Thank you for having me. Always nice to see you.
Well, it's great to see you too, though I wish the circumstances were less dark, because, I mean, what the hell? Trump has basically invoked this unlawful federal takeover of Washington, D.C., declaring a crime emergency despite a 30-year decline in violent crime. So, Mara, can you explain how this manufactured crisis is essentially a prototype for martial law? And this is, of course, isn't the first time that Trump has done this, but he's basically extending what he started in LA to other cities across the country.
Well, I think what's happening right now in Washington, D.C. is, as you said, it is a prototype. It's a prototype of a police state. And Trump is looking at the District of Columbia as an easy mark for him to start imposing military rule, military force, federal police, National Guard, and to normalize it, to have people get used to the idea of seeing the military on the streets of American cities, and to have that kind of occupation force become a day-to-day existence. And he started with the District of Columbia with a racist tirade on Monday, in which he was, proclaiming the city as a disgusting wasteland. And, he doesn't know anything about the city, of course, but it doesn't matter. And also talking with just like dripping racism about basically bulldozing, primarily working class Black neighborhoods, using a lot of veiled language, inciting and calling for violence against the residents of District of Columbia. But what he's done here is he has called out the National Guard because by a quirk of law in the District of Columbia, unlike most, real states that have governors, the governors can call out the National Guard. In the District of Columbia National Guard can be called out by the president. So he's done that. And then he's federalized the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Department. That has never been done before. There is a provision, Section 40 in the DC Home Rule Act, that allows this to happen under certain circumstances. Certainly, we don't think either the circumstances for National Guard or federalization of DC police have been met. There are not emergency circumstances. Crime has fallen. He actually said he was doing this because of an increase in violent crime. But we know that that's not what this is about.
And, like Rania mentioned, he's already talking about expanding this to other cities. He named Oakland, LA, Chicago, New York City, Baltimore, all cities with black mayors, by the way, but saying they're all crime-ridden, they're all, anarchic, chaotic. And I guess, he's doing the DC thing under the guise of this Home Rule Act, but with states, I mean, it's an even different case where they have constitutional protections, states have autonomy, and I mean, it really feels like he's just completely doing away with the autonomy of state governments, like he tried to do in LA with the protests there. So what do you make of this? I mean, is any of this legal? What is the precedent for this, and is this going to be challenged in courts?
I would expect this will absolutely be challenged in courts. And we, of course, at the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund are evaluating our next steps in the District of Columbia. But what he's doing in DC, naming this as an emergency, I mean, the basis for the emergency is that he's saying an increase in violent crime, which didn't happen, doesn't exist. And he's pointing to particular incidents of violent crime. Specifically, as I think everyone probably saw, he was making much about the beating of the Doge worker by 15-year-olds, the Doge worker who was famously known for calling himself Big Balls, and making that the point of why now DC has to become, under military type force. But there's another challenge that's happening, and it's aside from the legal challenge, which is community challenge. And this is the same thing he's going to face. He faced it in LA. He's facing it in DC. Immediately, members of the community have been out in the streets. They have been shouting "Know Your Rights" information. They have been documenting what the police are doing. They are condemning what the police are doing. They are mocking what the police are doing. And it really shows this incredible community response by people who are making it clear, as this will be made clear all across the US, the people of the United States are not going to sit still and allow massive military force to occupy their cities. It's not going to happen. And I think he thinks that it will be either a walk or a massive show of force to try and push people down into submission, and it won't succeed.
Well, Mara, in the sense of it won't succeed, can you talk about what the pushback is? Or at the moment, is there any sort of political pushback from the Democrats, or are there organizations coming together to do anything to prevent this? Is there anything standing in Trump's way?
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of organizations in DC, ours and many others, and immigrant rights groups and civil liberties and civil rights groups who are all organizing. There are community groups and grassroots groups who are on the ground who are organizing. People are absolutely standing up. They're not pausing, they're not waiting. And there is, as I said, just this incredible community outpouring from people who are unaffiliated, who are on the street and suddenly see all these federal agents, because the other aspect is not just the federalization of DC police or the National Guard. The National Guard is mainly standing around the National Mall dressed in uniform with their armored carriers. That's pretty much what they're doing. It's like a photo op right now. But what they are doing is, starting before his announcement on Monday, they began surging hundreds of federal law enforcement, including a lot of FBI agents, but as well as DHS and other federal law enforcement, into the streets of the District of Columbia. Last night, they set up a checkpoint, and they were interrogating people who were driving down the U Street, 14th Street corridor. So this is the kind of operation where they're suddenly putting people up. But, the resistance is really very profound. It's multi-layered. It's coming from a lot of different sectors. Again, I don't see people sitting still or standing for this. And you can see right now that people are mobilizing, because we're going to stand up and fight for constitutional rights. We as lawyers, we as community members. These are rights that people hold dear, and they're not going to allow an authoritarian rule to be imposed on the population of the United States.
Mara, there was this leaked DHS memo, I don't know if you saw news about it, saying that this policy might actually be employed for years, that soldiers might be deployed to cities for years to counter these, and I'm quoting here, Al-Qaeda and ISIS-like threats from urban centers. And, I can't help but think this really overlaps with a lot of the rhetoric that's been coming out in the last 2 years since the start of the Gaza genocide, or even before with the war on terror. But there seems to be more and more of a move, especially under the Trump administration, to label people as terrorists or to tie them in with that. So how do you see that playing a role? How do you see that affecting protest and civil liberties?
The Trump administration has, as you said, tried to label all manner of groups and organizing and people under a terrorism label because they believe it gives them a source of authority to act against people in the United States. So they have done that with immigrant rights organizations, trying to suggest that by defending immigrant rights, that's somehow defending drug cartels. They've done this against those who are standing against genocide in Gaza by saying that, if you are standing up for the right of people not to be starved to death, somehow that is support for terrorism. So we see this, they're playing that hand frequently and a lot. We certainly expect to see more of it. But again, these are on feeble legal grounds, very feeble legal grounds. Certainly, they are going to try and grab at everything they can grab to try and assume a source of authority. But like what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now, I mean, it would be funny if it could be funny at certain points. I mean, it's a very serious situation. It's a very dangerous situation. It's a very oppressive situation. But, for those that saw, there was that man that is alleged to have thrown a wrapped Subway sandwich at law enforcement, and they arrested him and charged him with felony, or they're saying that they're going to charge him with a felony, presumably a felony assault on a police officer for allegedly throwing a Subway sandwich at a police officer. And then it turned out that he actually worked for the Department of Justice. And Pam Bondi came out today and announced that this proves that he's a member of the deep state that they've been fighting all along. It says so much about that operation.
Mara, it seems like with this administration, they're really trying all angles, which you've just alluded to. I mean, whether it's in order to sort of like impose police state, as you say, fascist rule. Maybe that's a bit of extreme language to use, but they've tried to do it through the realm of Palestine, right? By, using it as a way to strip people of their rights and disappear them and put them in immigration detention and eventually move on to American citizens if they could. And that's sort of stalled for the time being, but it's still in the works. They're trying to do it through, supposed violent crime, which isn't even like a thing right now, at least, if you're talking about a 30-year low in violent crime, not really sure how you can go around using that to justify putting the U.S. military in U.S. cities. And before that, they had tried to use the issue of protest, violent protest when people were protesting in L.A., and in some cases rioting against these ICE disappearances of immigrants. It just seems like God, we're not even a year into this administration. It's a really overwhelming attempt through every legal measure imaginable to really try to impose, like you said, a police state. I guess I'm just making a remark here more than anything else, but I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I assume there's more to come.
Well, as much as, I am and others are mocking the operations at points because they frankly deserve to be, it is also extremely serious. It is incredibly threatening. What we are seeing in Washington, D.C. is maybe the most dangerous step yet, because it is absolutely the model. It is an effort to impose police state tactics in D.C. and then roll them out in cities across the United States. The threat that this poses is exceptional. The threat that this poses to fundamental democratic rights in this country is exceptional and unprecedented. And it really does require every single one of us to figure out what role we can play in terms of building consciousness, organizing opposition. From our perspective at the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, all legal means necessary to find ways to challenge unlawful conduct, which is what we are doing. And, The threat that Trump wishes to pose is also what you described. It's their sort of shock and awe attack. It's to make people feel unstable, off guard, overwhelmed, unable to respond. But I think what we are seeing is that people are learning, okay, actually, we get this. We see what's happening. He's trying to terrorize us. He is terrorizing populations. There are entire populations of the United States that are under constant threat and fear and terror of being kidnapped and snatched, taken away, sent away. This is absolutely terrorizing. But there's also so many people who are able to defend their neighbors and defend their coworkers and defend their friends and their families, and who are doing that. Because when you have an epic battle like this, which is what this is becoming, everyone has to make a decision about who they're going to be and where they're going to be and how they want to be able to look back on this on the other side of it. And I think most of us are making the right decision about how we're moving forward in this moment.
What would you tell people who are seeing what's happening, that are frustrated? What would you say they should do, or how can they sort of help it to stop this, push for a police state?
Everyone needs to be organizing. So if you're not part of an organization, find an organization. It doesn't matter what it is, but find a community, find a group, find people that you can talk to, find those you can organize with. Find a way to be part of a process of those who want to stand up together. Then you don't feel isolated. Part of the terrorism and terrifying nature of what this administration does is also to try and make people feel so afraid and alone and that no one has their back. But when you are organizing and you're standing in solidarity with others, that goes away. And you know that you have so many other people who are with you, who are willing to defend the freedoms that we believe in and to fight for liberation that we believe in.
Well, Mara, I really appreciate you coming on and breaking all this down for us. Really appreciate it. Mara Verheyden Hilliard, constitutional rights litigator and co-founder and executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Thank you for joining us on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was depressing. Okay.
Yeah.
Got anything to say?
I mean, it's funny, you raised that Trump doesn't know the city, or Mara did, and I was like, I don't think I've ever seen any president. I mean, I certainly haven't seen Trump walk the streets of DC any further than that one time he went to that church to take that picture, and they ended up shooting hundreds of protesters. But it's I mean, it is remarkable that U.S. politics, it's I think it's a you thing, because U.S. politicians, imagine Trump trying to walk U Street in D.C. or coming to Manhattan.
No, because American politicians are despised and hated, especially
Yes.
the president, by a significant portion of the population.
Yeah, but in most other countries, politicians who are beloved walk the streets and people are throwing flowers at them and rice and all this, and it's unbelievable. And I remember all those commercials in the midterms, I think in 2022 or something, with all the crazy dark shading, dramatic music about violent crime. And this has been a narrative they've just been pushing like crazy, but it really feels like it's starting to get really serious now.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to come back to this story since Trump seems to plan to do this in other cities across America. I'm sure we'll
Yes,
unfortunately have
not
to.
going away.
But we are going to move on to our next guest, who is one of our favorites here at the Freedom Side Live, and that is Abubaker Abed, Palestinian journalist and commentator from Gaza. Abubaker, welcome back to the Freedom Side Live.
Thank you so much for having me again.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, but once again, I'm sorry it always has to be under these really horrific circumstances. And, we're having you on this week to discuss Israel's systematic and seemingly accelerated targeting of Gaza's journalists. We witnessed earlier this week the assassination of 5 Al-Jazeera staff members, including prominent and beloved reporter Anas Al-Sharif for Al-Jazeera Arabic. And, I'm just curious, as we are now, I think more than 230 Palestinian journalists in Gaza have been murdered by Israel since October 7th alone. I mean, many have been murdered before that. And Abubaker, up until recent months, you were in Gaza as a journalist reporting from there under threat of Israeli assassination, just like everybody else in Gaza. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on this recent news of the assassination of Anas and his colleagues before we go on from there.
Well, I think it's a stain on every media body all across the globe. That's what they have accepted. That's what they have allowed since the early days of the genocide. And I'm not even shocked. Like, it's very expected, and that's what people have been predicting to happen to Anas Al-Sharif, because in one of his latest posts, he put something up on Twitter saying that I'm calling on free committees to protect journalists and all media organizations to provide me protection because I'm being smeared by the Israeli spokesperson Avichai Adrei and other Israeli media personalities and everyone, and he felt in danger. No one cared about him, and this is normal. This is the symptom of white supremacism. This is the symptom of the racism that we're living through. This is the worst. This is the failure and disappointment of the Arab regimes. No one cares. No one cares about Palestinians. If people cared from the beginning, that would have been stopped a long time ago. But people don't care. So, no matter how long we talk about the assassination of Anas Al-Sharif, which was a blow, which was one of the heaviest losses Palestinians have endured since October the 7th. Nothing will change this. Like, people are talking about the journalists. We've been reporting tirelessly in Gaza. I'd been reporting there, and then I had to leave last April because I faced some kind of similar threats by Israeli media personalities, and I think some of them is someone called Even, who is an ex-Israeli soldier who's been smearing Palestinian journalists for a very long time since this genocidal assault by Israel started, and some other media personalities, and then those threats kept circulating around until Israel takes them. And there are some collaborators of the Palestinian Authority who are mouthpieces for Israel who take these threats around and who play a major role in assassinating those journalists. So we are under, no protection. And the reality is that when we talk about Anas Al-Sharif or any kind of other journalist, then people think that they are disguising a journalist or whatever. And then Western media, of course, takes this because all of them are a mouthpiece for Zionism. All of them are cheap sellouts. The fact is, we have to talk about this. Like, when do journalists have time to do secret terrorism? When do journalists have time to go and launch rockets at Israel or whatever, or to occupied Palestine? Because you see Anas Al-Sharif, for example, he's been posting on his social media platforms and appearing live on Al-Jazeera 24/7. So I'm just wondering, when did he have the time? I'm being naive at the moment, but when did he have the time to do the secret journalism? That's the same story for every journalist and media working in Gaza. I was with them, and I remember Anas Al-Sharif. I never met him, to be honest, but I talked to him one time, and I do know the other journalist, Mohammed Al-Khaldi. Those journalists don't stop working, Rania, don't stop working. They don't even get to see their families to do secret journalism or to join the military or whatever. And also, I hate the fact that we are defending this because, well, let them have a political affiliations. It's none of your business. Like, we're not going to kill people because they are, for example, here in Ireland, because they are joining a social democratic party or the other parties in Ireland. The same in Britain. We're not going to smear people or incite death against them because they are Labour or they are Conservative or they're Tory or whatever. So this kind of comparison, it's absolutely disgusting. As also, like, give me one picture where Anas Al-Sharif holds a gun. So it's all like made up lies. It's just a propaganda and a smear media campaign to silence the voice of Palestinians. And unfortunately, that's more of a symptom of the silence of the words and the complicity of the disgusting Western media and Western governments.
It's really so sick what they're saying about him, about his so-called political affiliations, as if the journalists out there in the West aren't running cover for Israel. and they're running cover for baby killers. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about the role of Western journalists. I'm sure you saw Clarissa Ward from CNN. She put out this statement, right? She put out this statement saying that she recognizes Israel is committing war crimes. I mean, we're 2 years into this Holocaust in Gaza, and she comes to her senses. And, one of the things I noticed she said is that she also feels powerless in this, which I find crazy because she works for CNN. But I want to know, what is your assessment of the Western press? What report would you give? What grade would you give to the Western press on the issue of Palestine? What do you have to say about Clarissa Ward's statement?
Minus a million. Minus a million. I would give him if I would give him a grade. It's a minus a million because they've been complicit in this role. I've been invited recently by a number of those Western media outlets, including the BBC, CNN, and CBC Canada, and I just replied to them, look, I don't have the honor to speak with you. You are a mouthpiece for Zionism, and you're just complicit in the genocide. The only time I will be talking to you it will be at The Hague. And here is the fact that those Western media outlets are trying now to seem that they have been against it, like Clarissa Ward. She's been regurgitating Israel's lies at the beginning of this genocide. She's been covering up Israel's hoaxes, and we remember that act of a play when she took the ground at the time when she claimed that Hamas fired rockets at Israel or whatever. So I hate those propagandists, and I can't give them the time or give them the honor for what they are doing right now, because I can't forgive people who have justified the killing of anybody, even if a single person in Gaza. I can't really forgive them. I can't forget them. And as I told you, I want to talk to them at a court when I raise a case against them and when they are held accountable. Then we think about it. But those journalists, unfortunately, look, after 22 months into the genocide, I was just looking at the news, and until now, the British media, the American media, and every kind of Western media, even here in Ireland, whose government is supportive of Palestine, but it's still a very complicit government, by the way. It's a very despicable government. But anyways, when you look at the media right now, you will see the same phrases. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, the Israeli military says. So what Israel says comes at the top of the story. There is nothing that we can take for granted from Palestinian voices on the ground. And that's the peak of dehumanization that we've been seeing over the past 2 years. And it continues. Look, those journalists, those so-called journalists and editors, they're sitting on the most comfortable sofas in their houses, and they have the most luxuries in all life, and they can go around with their families, and they have children, they have everything. And then it's just some keyboard keys, and that's it. They praise them, and let's justify this Holocaust of our time, and let's justify this massacre because there was a Hamas command center, and they're not even on the ground to verify it. They're not even on the ground to say anything about it. But they're just controlled. They're just controlled, as I told you, by the Zionist regimes and the Zionist lobby groups, like in the UK and here in Ireland, unfortunately, and different countries across the globe, particularly in the West. They are controlling the media. They're controlling the politicians' minds, and that's the reality of the West. They're a bunch of cheap sellouts, whether the politicians, whether the media journalists, or whether who they are. They're a bunch of cheap sellouts. They don't have a soul. They're very callous and they're soulless. You can buy them for €1. That's the reality. That's what I've seen, and I can tell you that. That's what I've seen here in Ireland, even, which was appalling for me. And it continues like this because, what would you do to them? Tell me, what would you do to them? Except, taking them to the courts. If we live in a very fair world, those people must have been fined or must have been prosecuted from a very, very long time, for a very long time, since the beginning.
Abubaker, I remember seeing you post how the BBC had invited you on, and the producer had asked you, oh, by the way, does your family have any affiliation with Hamas? And I'm just blown away by the audacity, and also just shame. It's shameful. You should be embarrassed to be behaving that way in the midst of a genocide. But Abubaker, I do want to ask you, you mentioned that you had to leave Gaza in April. So now you've been a few months outside of Gaza after spending a lot of your time reporting from there. I imagine when you were in Gaza, a lot of your time was dominated by surviving the day and also reporting. So now that you've had some space from that and you're not having to spend maybe hours getting, basic needs met for you and your family, I'm curious, I'm assuming you're probably processing a lot, but what has been the most maybe disorienting aspect of being outside of Gaza and just witnessing, I guess, what life outside is like? And then also, I know you're still in touch, obviously, with your family and friends, and I hope, everyone is as okay as they can be under the current circumstances. But yeah, what has maybe shocked you the most being outside?
People are individualistic, materialistic, and capitalistic. It's not like Gaza, here everybody thinks about themselves, and even when it comes to their support of Palestine, they think that they are doing Palestine a favor when they do so, which is completely wrong, because their governments are complicit in the genocide. Their governments are funding killing children and starving entire population. So please, you're not doing us a favor when you support Palestine, when you stand against the genocide. You are absolutely advocating for your humanity. You're not advocating for Palestine. You should stop your government's complicity, and then let's talk about your support of Palestine, because what you're doing is your duty and is your obligation. And another thing, people think that Palestine and Gaza are opposed on social media. It's a session nearby, it's a protest, whatever. And I hate it, and that's why it has been going on for the past 2 years. And that's the reality, that people think Palestine. We can post about it, and we've been posting about it for over 22 months right now. We've been posting about it. Nothing has happened, and people just protest once a week, once 2 weeks, even here. That's nonsense. You are protesting every 2 weeks, and in these 2 weeks, multiply 22 by 14 by 100. That's 1,400 Palestinians would have been killed in that period. And then you're telling me that this is enough. People are not. Honestly, I just have to be honest. People are probably doing something, but you're not doing something for Palestine. You're doing something to prevent the complicity of your own governments. And I'm saying that to every government across the globe almost. And the reality is that people, there's still, in my opinion, being here in the West for around 4 months now, people are not 100%, are not ready to sacrifice, Rania. We can protest Palestine in the frame where we can't make sacrifices. We can protest for Palestine and do something for Palestine, but we're not going to sacrifice. If we have extra money, we will send it to Palestine. If we have free time, we will go for a protest. So just we absolve our guilt. That's what they are thinking about. Unfortunately, only a few people who are honest with themselves, and they don't stop. So, everyone has a responsibility to stop this, but unfortunately, we've been talking for 22 months. Nothing has happened, as I told you. People have to do more. People have to go for civil disobedience, have to pressure their governments to stop the Israeli ties, and to stop being complicit in the genocide. And people have to do this, because in previous times we've seen, and they have to support the resistance. I just have to mention this. They have to support the military resistance in Gaza, because we are talking about a group of fighters who don't exceed 40,000 fighters, maybe less right now, maybe fewer than that right now. They are fighting the most vicious powers in the world under the auspices of the US and every Western country, and the protection of the Arab regimes, particularly Egypt and Jordan. Now tell me, who has supported these fighters? They've been fighting starved. They've been fighting on behalf of the world's humanity. They've been doing everything in their power for the past 22 months. They've been disappointed and let down by the international community and everyone. And then people are afraid to support the military resistance. Like, they need us to be polite victims, gentle victims, as they want to portray us. I hate it. I hate it very much. So I'm just calling for a military intervention to stop the Holocaust of our time. And I hope that people will let Israel fight its own war. I hope people will pressure their governments and put them under pressure to stop their complicity in the genocide and their role and in this ongoing Holocaust. And that I want Israel to fight its own war. That's what I want at the moment. I don't need a ceasefire, but I need Israel to fight its own war. And for those who have been standing by passively for the past 22 months, well, time will come at you, will shame you, will haunt you forever. And the images of children and wiped out families and the destruction of much of the Gaza Strip, they will haunt you forever. Tomorrow they will be asked, tomorrow they will be held accountable. So we just need to focus on the fact that we need to support the military resistance in Gaza. And those are the fighters of our humanity, the fighters on behalf of the entire world against the Western imperialism and the British US empire. And I hope that people support and advocate for the military resistance in Gaza and forget about the two-state solution, because it's nonsense. It's just a despicable, westernized plan to dehumanize Palestinians and to force them to forget every basic human right. So that's what I really need. I need Israel to fight its own war, and I need people to stop their government's complicity and let Israel fight its own war. And we have a right to military resist, and we have a right to fight back against an occupation.
Well, Abubaker Abed, I really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side Live, and we look forward to having you on again. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you so much. All the best. Bye.
Well, Kei, we are going to continue this conversation about the genocide in Gaza. I'm just going to go right into our next guest. We have with us Palestinian writer and analyst Mohammed Shahada to discuss Israel's ongoing lies. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Rania. I really appreciate it as well. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let's get right into it. I mean, you've done a fantastic job of, I have to say, you do it with so much grace and so much patience over the last 2 years. I've seen you constantly just debunking Israeli lie after lie after lie. Your account and your work is really a huge resource. And you did it just this week after the Israelis came out after they killed Anas Al-Sharif. And they celebrated that assassination and claimed that he was a member of Hamas. I mean, apparently, while Anas was spending all his time reporting as Al-Jazeera Arabic's correspondent on the ground, reporting the genocide of his own people day in and day out, barely even seeing his family, they want us to believe that he was also moonlighting as, I don't even know what there's something claimed that he leads some rocket launching unit in Hamas. So I don't know, let's start there. I'm just curious, if you can walk us through how the way that the Israelis, this is a pattern, they've accused so many journalists on the ground in Gaza of being members of Hamas and then used that to justify assassinating them.
Yes, absolutely. So Anas's story is identical to another of a friend of mine, Yasser Mortaja, who was killed during the Great March of Return 2018. He was shot by an Israeli sniper despite wearing a press-marked vest. And then you had the Israeli government immediately coming and saying that Yasser Mortaja was a Hamas security operative on Hamas's payroll. No evidence whatsoever. They posted a couple of screenshots from his Facebook profile, the same that they do now with Anas's Telegram channel, and alleged messages that he had posted. And they posted some pictures of him next to Hamas leaders who are running Gaza. They are basically the government. They are part of civil society, a political party. So you will run into them here and there. And if you're a journalist, of course, you will document your access to people in power and you would post these pictures. So they tried to justify it with the same mechanism. But then Israel didn't know that Yasser had just received a grant from the US government, from USAID, after going through a lengthy process of extreme vetting to ensure he has nothing to do with Hamas whatsoever. And they didn't know that actually Hamas had arrested once Yasser Mortaja and interrogated him because he was filming without a license or without a permit, and he was beaten up during the interrogations. So these two incidents, they destroyed Israel's narrative completely. Then they resorted to the backup plan. Okay, what can we do now? We will investigate. But Rania, to give you, like the last time we've ever heard of that investigation was 2018, so it's been 7 years. But to give you a sense of how effortless it is for Israel to lie and frame anyone in Gaza as Hamas, there's a journalist that I knew in Gaza, is called Walid Mahmoud. And I think after Operation Protective Edge, the war in 2014, he befriended someone that was running a Jeremy Corbyn Facebook fan page that had 72,000 members on it. And that person in the UK offers Walid the opportunity to post sporadic updates from Gaza, like pictures, messages, what's happening on the ground, and that's it. And Walid was not posting actively. He was like posting something once a week, once a month, with his name underneath it and say his signature and saying, I'm from Gaza. Before the elections in 2019, Walid gets a call from an Israeli military officer. He's called Baruch Yedid. And Baruch starts interrogating Walid harshly. And he says, are you the one running the Jeremy Corbyn page? And he explains, I'm an admin there. I post once a month, once a week, and I sign my name on it. So it's no surprise. And then he asks him, are you Hamas? And he says, no, I have nothing to do with Hamas. I criticized Hamas my entire life. And he hangs up. And then there's an article published in some sort of obscure Israeli outlet. It was called Tazbit, Security Military Analysis outlet. And it says, Jeremy Corbyn propaganda campaign is orchestrated by Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is trying to get Jeremy Corbyn elected. And he refers to Walid as a senior Hamas operative who was part of Hamas's propaganda apparatus because of his fluent command of the English language. And that article flies everywhere. It spreads immediately. It goes viral. It's in the Jerusalem Post, in Israel Hayom. It's all over. Then you had organizations like Jihad Watch and some of those lunatic organizations listing Walid as a Hamas operative. So now there's like a hit target on this guy's back randomly overnight. Then he gets phone calls from mainstream media journalists interviewing him. Are you Hamas? But don't lie to us. We were told that you're Hamas. He gets a call from a guy from the Telegraph. And it goes everywhere. And a few days later, after the damage is done, he reaches out to journalists here and there. He gets interviewed and he says, I have nothing to do with Hamas. Hamas actually detained me at some point, and this and that happened. And he provides the ultimate debunking of it. The article that was written about him disappeared. It completely vanished in thin air on Tazbit. You cannot find any trace of it. You will still find a mention of it in the Jerusalem Post in Israel Hayom, but the article disappeared as soon as the elections were over. And the Jihad Watch listing of Walid disappeared as well. It's insane. It's the same, like there was one incident during the Great March of Return in Gaza in which Israel announced, okay, there was today this major security incident. A Hamas vehicle came to the borders. They breached the fence. They drove in with a pickup truck. They started exchanging fire with our troops. They fired RPGs. Then another Jeep came in. Then another vehicle. Then backup. Then troops stormed the borders. Then we had to fire mortar shell. Then we had to open machine guns. And this like major epic battle. And it gets reported in the New York Times. And it goes viral as well. And then a journalist with the Israeli newspaper 972, he spends years, I think he spent about like 5 years trying to get to the bottom of this, to track down the story, verify it. And he contacts people in the IDF and in the government and in Kogat and in the Shin Bet and in the Mossad. And then he realizes they pulled it out of thin air. The whole thing never happened. Not one bit of it. Zero. And then he himself gets shocked. He says, I knew the IDF would lie. I knew they would make things up. I knew they would exaggerate, but that applies to lying about details of an actual thing. Pulling a whole major event out of thin air, I didn't think they were capable of this. But yes, absolutely they are. It's like part of my daily routine is to update my list of Israeli lies. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe now I need to write a book, but I don't think one book would fit all of them. It's like the main goal of Israeli lies is not to make the case for Israel. It's not to persuade you that they have a just cause. It's rather the opposite. I have a friend who attended once a training course at the Israeli consulate in California. And the trainer came on the first day and he said, 20% of the students on your campus are pro-Palestinian, 10 to 20% are pro-Israeli. What do you do about the majority in between? And everyone in the room was saying, we try to win them over. We try to explain Israel to them. And the Israeli trainer said, no, this is wrong. This is bad. That's the worst strategy you can ever come up with. You tell them it's complicated. It's complicated. It's complicated. Tire them out. Exhaust them mentally until they check out of this topic. And if they refuse, then use the backup plan. Say, why do you choose to obsess over this topic out of all the conflicts in the world? Is it because you're anti-Semitic? So don't engage them, because even if you try to convince someone in Israel's cause, and I know people who are drawn to the topic by this kind of bait, they might get curious and look other facts up that then move them to the other camp. So just push them away from it. And I heard it from a lot of like even European officials, diplomats, who are basically saying, my brain is bleeding from following the news cycle on this. So I decided to just let go of it and stop reading anything about it. It's too much. It's too mentally draining. It's exhausting. And that's exactly Israel's goal.
I was at a protest the other day protesting the murder of Anas, and there were some pro-Israel counter-protesters there, and I was like, why are you even here? Like, what are you protesting? You're protesting against people who don't want journalists to be killed in Gaza. And what this person actually said to me was that the pictures coming out of Gaza are fake. That the pictures of starvation, the pictures of people being killed, these are actually fake photos. And I was like, if we weren't here talking about Palestine, if we weren't here talking about the genocide in Gaza, I think you were like denying the Holocaust, like the Nazi Holocaust. But they are denying the Holocaust in Gaza. And it's like, these are the most dishonest, this is the most dishonest country, the most dishonest people. And, I just wanted, because it's like, it's actually the opposite. This is the most documented genocide ever. It's the first live stream genocide we've ever seen. And, I just wonder, because we have all these international bodies and all these international treaties and all this, what more is needed? I mean, what is even the purpose or the use of having any of these things if they don't act on it?
Well, basically, Israel knows that whatever they say, the mainstream media would have to counter the Palestinian narrative, what they call the Palestinian narrative, no matter how much documentation you provide, how much forensic analysis, how much, like all of it, they would still say, but you still have an agenda, and they still need to platform an Israeli counterpoint. I once got a call from a BBC producer in the evening, and she was like, I need a Palestinian guest. Can you recommend someone from the West Bank? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I know many brilliant people. And then she was like, but they need to not be too critical of Israel, because if they talk about things like occupation, and occupation was like the biggest taboo for her, if they say occupation and this and that, then we have to bring an Israeli guest as well to offer the counterpoint. And then she was like, and I need them to be critical of Hamas. And I said, okay, maybe. And then she was like, it's good also if they're critical of the Palestinian Authority. And then I was like, bring an Israeli guest instead. And I gave them the number of one of the most badass Palestinian activists I can think of. And I don't think they've ever hosted her again after this. Yeah. But like, there's basically this in journalism, the basic journalistic ethic is if someone comes to you and says it's raining outside and another person says, no, it's not raining, your job is not to say he said, she said. Your job is to look out of the window and determine. But even that is too dangerous for them. Like I heard from journalists from multiple outlets, like I've got a lot of people reaching out from Washington Post, CNN, BBC, The Guardian, LA Times, etc. They reach out constantly for information. And a lot of them, like I would chat with them informally and be like, okay, so how is it going and how is the job? It's almost unanimous. I've never seen something as frightening, this concerted campaign of disinformation by omission. And they tell me about how much of a struggle it is to even pitch an idea on Gaza. That the editorial room at some point told them, no more coverage of the Gaza war, instead bring anti-Hamas voices to cover the anti-Hamas demonstrations in Gaza. And then they were like, but the demonstrations are also against the war. No, that doesn't matter. Only the anti-Hamas part of it. So it's basically like there's this concerted effort to disappear it. There's the other thing that I think is lunatic. I've never seen anything like this. I do this routine where I read every single Israeli newspaper twice a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the evening. And it became my favorite hobby to debunk what Israel is saying in English with what Israel is saying in Hebrew, because they are admitting, they are confessing all their crimes in Hebrew, bragging about it. And then I would send these articles as it is to journalists in like CNN, in Reuters, in Associated Press, in Washington Post, etc., like the entire mainstream media apparatus. And I would say, please just translate this as it is. For example, they're looking into who's obstructing the ceasefire. And then you see on every single Israeli newspaper, except for Channel 14, that is a pro-Netanyahu garbage dumpster, on every single Israeli newspaper, they're saying Netanyahu is the one obstructing the ceasefire. So I would send 16 articles saying this, just translate it. And they're like, nah, we cannot. And then like recently, a journalist asked me, she was like, what about Hamas looting aid in Gaza? And I was like, seriously? Here's this article. It's from Israel's national television, Channel 12, the most watched Israeli TV. It's an Israeli senior military source, and he's explicitly saying, we documented 110 looting incidents inside Gaza because they have meticulous aerial surveillance of every centimeter, every inch in Gaza, 24/7. They can see anything. If there was a single incident of Hamas looting, they would have produced the footage immediately. And that IDF source, a major Israeli senior source in the IDF, is saying 110 incidents, none of them, zero, carried out by Hamas. he's saying all of them carried out by either the organized gangs that are basically like the Abu Shabaab and the ISIS-linked gangs that Israel is operating as a proxy, or they're carried out by desperate civilians because Israel keeps killing the policemen that try to prevent civilians from overrunning the trucks and looting. So it's the clearest admission you can ever get. And then her answer is this. She said, I don't know how credible Channel 12 is. I'm like, this is Israel's national television. It's the biggest TV in Israel. They have Amit Segal. The guy is Netanyahu's biggest cheerleader. They're not some sort of pro-Palestinian rag. And then she says exactly this. She says, but it's an internal document and they said it in Hebrew. It was not intended for an international audience. Like, your job is to translate it to an international audience. And she never did.
You're completely blown away with my jaw on the floor, even though this shouldn't surprise me. And I know you've probably got an endless stream of stories like that. So you should write a series of books and just fill them all with Israel's insane lies. Because like you said, it's like, this must be the most intense and lengthiest disinformation campaign in history. And it's really effective because you see almost 2 years into a genocide, the entire mainstream media apparatus in the West is still running cover for the Israelis. I mean, even after they killed Anas this week, there was several instances of, even in headlines, saying Al-Jazeera journalist killed, Israel says he's Hamas. And it's like you said, it's like might as well just say Israel says that the moon is blue. Because at this point, you might it's just whatever Israel says gets reported, and I guess you can figure it out on your own. But Mohammed, I also wanted to ask you, with this insane disinformation campaign, I think we're also at an inflection point in history in the sense that people don't believe Israel. I mean, the Israelis have everything working on their side. The entire corporate media apparatus, you said CNN, Washington Post, BBC, all of them are basically like have people in editorial rooms like running cover for the Israelis to make them look as innocent as possible. And despite that, despite also having the ability to send any of their spokespeople on air in any language that they want, it's not working. People are seeing through the lies. So I'm just curious if you can speak to that, the fact that Israel's narrative has unraveled, I think, on a global scale like never before.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, three things. One final anecdote. I have a lot of these, but mainstream media, when Israel kills Razan al-Najjar, a nurse, a paramedic during the Great March of Return in 2018. She's killed by a sniper on camera. All of it is documented. She's a woman, so they cannot say a Hamas operative. They cannot say Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. So Israel comes up with multiple narratives. One of them, she's a human shield. And look, here's a video clip of her admitting I'm a human shield. And they take like 3 seconds out of a whole long video in which she's saying, if Israel is saying that we're human shields, I'm happy to protect children from getting shot by the IDF and blah, blah. And basically, the New York Times write an article about Israel being caught lying and publishing a doctored video about Razan. And here's how the article goes. The article is 28 paragraphs long. I remember the number specifically, 28 paragraphs. And the first paragraph, Israel published this damning video that proves Razan al-Najjar was a human shield, and she admits that she was a human shield. And then if you go back to paragraph, I think 18 or 20, something in between, you would see a passing mention saying, by the way, the Israeli video is doctored. They lifted at the very bottom of it. There's another thing, like I have a friend at a major American newspaper, and he's the one that's been working there the longest in this sort of mainstream media industry on Israel-Palestine. He's interviewed Yasser Arafat, Khalil al-Wazir, and the entire PLO leadership back in Tunis in the 80s. And then as soon as October 7th happens, they decommission him. They said, you're off that topic. Go and look at Taiwan. Go and look at China. Go and look at any other country. And literally, he said they hired those very junior journalists that have never been to the region, that don't know anything, those young, naive Americans whose only source of information is the IDF spokesperson. But even with all of this, as you said, Rania, you have this giant machinery that is there to brainwash, to overwhelm people, to push them away from trying to understand what's happening. And even with all of this, Israel is admitting nonstop, our propaganda is collapsing. Like I see it in Hebrew every single day. They're saying our propaganda is collapsing. But their answer is we need to do even more propaganda. Double down. If you hit your head against the wall, it doesn't fall. Hit harder. It will fall next time. That's the Israeli approach with genocide, with murder in Gaza. You didn't kill enough people last time. Kill more people. Destroy more stuff. It'll work. It'll deter them. And it never does. And it's the same with the propaganda. But the Israelis, they come up with the most laughable explanations for it. They say Hamas succeeded in the propaganda battle because Hamas is running the most sophisticated propaganda campaign that we've ever seen. I'm like, have you ever heard a single Hamas leader putting a coherent sentence in English without having to pause 10 times in between? It's not their first language. Most of Hamas leaders, they've never been outside Gaza. The overwhelming majority of them, they've never even stepped a foot outside Gaza. And every time, like, the media doesn't talk to Hamas, nobody wants to talk to Hamas. So how would Hamas launch this sophisticated operation? And does Hamas have more resources in Gaza while getting genocided, while all of them are bombed, while they're in the tunnels or in destroyed buildings or they're ambushing the IDF? They would have time to launch a multifaceted propaganda campaign with psychologists and psychiatrists and polling and data and focus groups. And then when I try to say this is garbage, they come up with the alternative explanation. No, it's because Iran is launching a massive, sophisticated propaganda campaign. And I'm like, the same. Where? Show me. Where? How? Like, have you ever seen the Iranians winning the hearts and minds of the West about Iran itself? They're the most sanctioned country on earth. So why are they not running that sophisticated propaganda campaign for themselves? But the last point I wanted to raise, I have what you can call the Forrest Gump syndrome. Always sort of the wrong guy at the right table. Europeans, they keep inviting me for these meetings, Americans, etc. I don't know why. I keep showing up. I'm like, okay, come and meet us at this foreign ministry today. We're going to have ministers, members of parliament, and whatever. I'm like, are you sure you got the right guy? And I keep showing up every time. And first thing I say to them is, I know this is fraud. This is a sham. This is a theater. And you have to perform in it over and over again, the same stuff over and over, in order to legitimize your salary, your paycheck, your fancy job title. And that's it. You need to cross a check mark. We hosted a number of Palestinians. We talked to civil society, blah, blah, blah. It looks nice on bureaucratic papers. So basically, I say this, and then I say, I keep coming in the hope, I lie to myself that there is some maybe 1% that I can impact in this room. And I know it's not going to happen because you guys are unserious. And one of them at some point, he listened to me. And I went to Germany, a German official. He took a major sick leave, I think, for about 10 months. And I called him and said, why did you disappear? And he said, I suffered a moral burnout. I couldn't repeat the same stuff over and over and over again. And then he says, I'm working now on a science fiction literature novel about bureaucratic demons, the demons that walk amongst us, in which he wants to describe his own minister, Annalena Baerbock and Scholz and this whole leadership. But basically with those guys, they behind closed doors. Like one time I was invited to a top European leader, and I'm not sure why, but I showed up. I spent weeks and weeks and weeks preparing. As soon as the door is closed, Chatham House rules, he says, we are completely irrelevant. And he says 80% of European governments are giving Israel the green light to carry out systematic destruction in Gaza, to wipe it out, to turn it uninhabitable, so people would have to leave. And all of those governments will keep talking about ceasefire, but they don't mean it. And then he says when the German foreign minister goes to Israel over and over and over again, the main thing she asks for is please, please, please kill fewer people. Keep the killing, just kill less than 100 per day. Then it wouldn't make as many headlines. It wouldn't give us a headache. So I'm frozen in my place. Like, what do I have to tell the guy? He's already convinced, but he wouldn't say a single word out of it outside. So I went to Brussels in June, and I went to meet with the cabinet of Kaja Kallas, the new EU foreign policy chief. And the impression that they gave me, she knows the Israeli government specifically, are obnoxious, sleazy, self-entitled, perpetual victims, at the same time supremacist chosen. So she went to Israel. That's the first time she's ever been to the Middle East. Never visited in her entire life. I think she was the prime minister of Estonia. Her main thing is Russia, Ukraine. And that's her main area of expertise. First time she goes to Israel, they take her to Yad Vashem. And she says, the victims have become the victimizers. And the Israelis are like, no, that's not the lesson we wanted to indoctrinate you into. And behind closed doors, her cabinet members, her senior official and advisors are saying she knows Gideon Saar is sleazy. She knows that type of mendacious, pathological liar that's trying to phone some care and sympathy. So they told me, like, early on, he would call and yell at her and berate her and lecture. And now he's trying to call her every day and send messages, happy Friday, happy Sunday, happy Valentine's Day, and trying to sweet talk her. And they told me, don't worry. She's a young woman. She understands that type of people. She knows sleazy men that are trying to lie their way into your heart. And then I get very optimistic. A few weeks later, a photo up between her and Gideon Saar. Isn't that the sleazy guy with the sweaty hands that she's running away from? And reassurances of the shared values between Europe and Israel, and all of it over and over again. So those guys, it's not that they don't know. They cannot stand the Israeli government. Whenever they bring Israelis to Europe for these workshops or conferences or meetings at foreign ministries, they bring the sanitized version of Israel. They bring the 22 Israeli activists. I know all of them on first name basis because there's only 22 people that are protesting the genocide in Gaza. So the number is higher, but I'm trying to make a point. But basically, it's higher but insignificant. It's still, I wouldn't put it at 1%. It's way lower than this. And the overwhelming majority of them, their opposition to the continuity of the war is basically to say the genocide is accomplished. Gaza is no more. Just end the war, lock up the place, prevent reconstruction, and they would leave. But basically, the Europeans keep inviting this version of Israel because they cannot stand the version of the Israeli mainstream from any political party, even Benny Gantz, the leader of the opposition. The Germans of all people, the German foreign ministry, a German diplomat told me, we cannot stand that guy. 10 years ago, we wouldn't even talk to him. He's a lunatic. But now we have to because he's in government. And as soon as he steps out of government, they sigh this sigh of relief. Oh, we don't have to talk to him anymore. So they keep interacting with the sanitized left-wing version of Israel to live in this alternative reality, to cope with their complicity. But even with all of this, like you see, this show is happening. They know what's going on. What's preventing them is a mix. It's not sort of satanic evil that is betraying Gaza. It's this human mix of cowardice, greed, careerism, self-interest, cupidity, ignorance, or racism. A lot of them, like there's a French diplomat that told me there are leaders that are happy to see Gaza being destroyed. They consider you, she told me verbatim, she said they consider you beggars, hungry mouses, the ungrateful beggars that keep asking for more and more money. So it would be a good thing from their perspective if you disappear, if Gaza is no more. So there is that mix. And the worst mix of it is basically the cowards. Like a senior diplomat from Switzerland, she tells me this. She says, our talking points are coming out of Tel Aviv. It's insane. I protested. But if I speak out publicly about it, I will never have a job again. Not just at the foreign
They never
ministry,
have a
but
job
even
again.
at the
Then you know what?
consulate.
Never have they never have a job again. At this point, you know what? I don't feel bad for people like this in the sense that they never have a job again. Like, why is that more important than doing something against a genocide?
But that's the thing. Like when it came
cowards,
to
like you
Palestinians,
said.
Yasser Arafat, once he was being pressured into accepting Camp David, which was insane. It was the worst peace proposal, quote unquote, for Palestinian statehood that they could ever come up with. It was 3 discontiguous Bantustans like South Africa, and even worse, in Gaza they wanted to keep 3 settlement blocks, like cutting Gaza into 4 pieces. In the West Bank as well, they wanted to keep 13% for this Israeli military bases, 8% annexing the settlement blocks, like etc. It was shit. But even then, Arafat is telling the Americans and the Israelis, if I accept that kind of deal that liquidates the right of return, that betrays Palestinian refugees in Lebanon in particular, he cared the most about them. He says, if I accept this, you would be invited to walk in my funeral. And the Americans and the Israelis, they answer with this very cold answer. They say, what's wrong with that? If you're a brave leader, you should be willing to sacrifice your life for this peace. It's not peace, it's surrender. But when it comes to the other way around, they tell us, no, it's too dangerous. I'm going to lose my job. I'm 1 year away from retirement. So I will lose that little pay that I get. And but there is satisfaction that some of those officials, when they leave and they're back to the normal world, they feel so ostracized, so shamed, even by their own spouses, even by their own kids and family members. And I know this from firsthand experiences. I know people that reached out to me, like senior officials. A senior official reached out and he was like, can you retweet me? I'm like, what? Who am I to retweet you? Dude, you were just the main talk of the town 2 weeks ago. Why? Who am I to, like, I'm a nobody. And then he's like, you have a legitimate voice. So if you retweet me, it might help to reestablish my credibility and legitimacy within my own community. And I feel outcast and
Wow.
ostracized.
Well,
So yes,
that's
a lot of
the
them, they will
least
face this.
punishment people like that deserve.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Like with that kind of people, I would say in the Palestinian movement, we always leave the door open. There's no such thing as someone who's irredeemable. As long as you come and admit what was happening was wrong, that you were part of it, and try to speak out, expose what was going on, and expose what's happening right now. It's better now than never. But the problem is that a lot of those people, they just rather disappear. Like that one diplomat, the one that's writing the literature science fiction novel about demons. I say, okay, so now that you got to this point, you cannot stand Schultz and Baerbock anymore. I have a lot of media connections. I'm happy to get you on multiple TVs. I'm happy to arrange interviews. I'm happy to be your publicist. And he says, no. I still want to maintain my line with the foreign ministry in case I go back there again.
Wow. Bureaucratic demons, indeed. It's really just the most projection. I guess the guy's writing an autobiography about bureaucratic demons. Mohammed Shahada, I want to thank you for joining us, for breaking all this down. It's a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you for all of your excellent work, and I hope we can get you back on the Freedom Side Live soon.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I mean, is that not the most outrageous? I just want to scream. I want to scream, Kei.
It's just so unbelievable. One thing Muhammad said that was just so, like, it really is the crux of it, that on one hand they're like the ultimate victims, and then on the other hand they are like, all this land was promised to them, this is all theirs, everyone get the hell out. And I don't know if people who are watching this saw the clip of Netanyahu saying he has a spiritual mandate to bring about the greater Israel, which is like the sort of biblical understanding of that Israel, that the sort of Jewish kingdom extends from Egypt to Iraq. And, it was like for years and years, you would be called a conspiracy theorist or anti-Semitic or whatever if you talked about this. We put out a video explaining the whole thing, and like all the Israeli comments are like, this is ridiculous, like no one wants this. And then he just comes out and says it. And at the same time, it's like, oh, every institution in the world is actually anti-Semitic. They hate Israel. They just hate Jews. They hate us. The UN is anti-Semitic. The, whatever, like World Central Kitchen is anti-Semitic. And it's just like, this is ridiculous. But to your point, I mean, I think people are reaching like the straw has broken the camel's back. Like, I mean, people are so frustrated. I see it every day. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's like, I don't think Zionism really has like a long-term solution for what they've created.
It doesn't. It doesn't have a long-term solution, and I don't think it has a long-term lifespan, but it's going to do so much damage on its way down, including wiping out a lot of lives in Gaza. And just to see the disgusting cowardice from these careerist assholes, like it's so sick. Like I don't care. I don't care that you might not have access anymore and you might lose your job. I don't care. Like,
Why would you want access?
I have no sympathy.
The guy wants access to the foreign minister who supports the Nazi regime in Palestine. Like what? For what? And these people are just like parasites. These people are just like cowards and parasites, and then also racists. Yeah.
Like that is real. That Nazi mentality among people in the global north who are in positions of power, where they're like happy to see Gaza wiped out. There are a segment of people who believe in that. Anyways, I mean, it's horrifying. But Kei, before we wrap up the show today, I did want to ask you if you could speak to something. I forgot to open the Freedom Side Live by telling everybody that we were going to bring them the truth about Jeffrey Epstein on this episode of the Freedom Side Live from Kei Pritsker himself. No, but in all seriousness, you did a really fantastic segment on Jeffrey Epstein. He's basically reemerged as a huge headline because of Trump's affiliation with him. Potential involvement with his sexual escapade, which I'm so sorry I just called like sex trafficking, sexual escapades. Anyways, can you explain to us, as Jeffrey Epstein reemerges in news headlines, why does this matter? What's really going on here? And, what do you have to say about Trump's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein? Because it seems to be a really destabilizing force in his presidency at this moment.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, people know the story of Jeffrey Epstein at this point, I hope, but obviously, the big controversy started with Donald Trump, who all of his surrogates, he himself on the campaign trail, were saying we're going to release the Epstein files, we're going to talk about Epstein, this and the other, which obviously implicates Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring, implicates many high-level politicians in a potential blackmail ring. So everyone's getting super excited, especially his base. And he comes out, in March or April, they start releasing these files, heavily redacted files, albeit to these conservative influencers of their choosing. Everyone's like, oh my God, is this happening? And, a few months ago, Pam Bondi as AG comes out and says, there's actually no client list. There's actually no client list. There's nothing here. We looked into it, blah, blah, blah. And the thing that everyone's upset about, obviously, is that not only do we know there's, a client list or whatever, obviously, Jeffrey Epstein was involved with very powerful people, but Donald Trump is obviously one of them. Donald Trump has been seen photographed with Jeffrey Epstein so many times. There were these letters that he wrote for his Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday that were published in the Wall Street Journal. There are videos of him saying, oh, Jeffrey Epstein, like, great guy. He likes to have fun. He knows how to have fun, and, he just likes them kind of young. But it's gotten especially crazy with, Trump saying now that it's a Democrat hoax, that this whole thing is just made up, and, the deep state or whatever is out to get him, when it's like clearly this guy is the deep state. Clearly, if we wanted to attack the deep state, we would start here. And even more bizarre, I think the latest news on this is what he's done with Ghislaine Maxwell. And I was doing some reading on Ghislaine Maxwell's situation. For those who don't know, she was like Jeffrey Epstein's right hand. She was essentially the fixer. So she would go out and find young women and recruit them into this sex trafficking network, and get them to recruit other women and basically pimp them out to these disgusting, powerful politicians. And she now, by the Trump administration, she is being granted partial immunity. They're seeking full immunity for her in exchange for testimony. But they've also moved her out of the prison that she was in. You see the mug shot up right now. They moved her to a prison called FPC Bryan, which is a minimum security prison. It has the lowest security level out of any federal prison. And this is crazy for a number of reasons. I mean, first, in order for someone who is a convicted sex trafficker to be let into a lower security prison, there's a tremendous process, because this is obviously like a violent, heinous crime you've committed. There's a huge process for this, but Ghislaine Maxwell is just thrust to the front of the line, and she's been moved to this prison where, get this, so FPC Bryan has a sports field. It has an arts and crafts program for the inmates. It has a theater program. It has a program where inmates are allowed to play with puppies and train them to become service animals. I mean, they don't lock the doors at this prison. It's one of those. And, for those who know the Epstein lore, Jeffrey Epstein was put in a similar type of prison. So, all that to say, why do we think this matters? Donald Trump has been insisting, oh, who cares about this? This is boring. This doesn't matter. But, I think there's something very fundamental. There's this fundamental question that almost gets overlooked, but I think it's actually one of the most important questions to go back to. Is I think everyone in the last few years has had this prevailing sense of are we even in the driver's seat as voters? Are we even in control of the system? Do we even have the power to change it? Or is it responding to someone else? And I think the prospect of the Epstein case, what we know about Epstein, here we really have the possibility, the very real possibility, that we're fundamentally not in control of the system, that the system is fundamentally compromised by, whether it's, foreign actors or intelligence or whoever, that the politicians, they don't listen to voters. they listen to handlers because they are actually these sick perverts who are being blackmailed by, CIA, Mossad, or MI6 or whoever. And, I think it's really important also, we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Gaza. Obviously, the big suspicion is that Jeffrey Epstein worked for Mossad or that he's somehow connected to Mossad. Of course, Ghislaine Maxwell was directly connected to the Mossad through her father, Robert Maxwell, who is widely suspected of being a Mossad agent, was given a state funeral in Israel on the Mount of Olives, which, by the way, Rania, I learned recently that it's not only the holiest burial site in Judaism, but actually many of the Messianic people in Israel believe that when the third temple is built and the end of the world comes, that the people on the Mount of Olives will actually come back to life. So according to that theory, Robert Maxwell will actually be resurrected. But, this also has huge implications for an issue like Palestine. I mean, you have to wonder, you see all these politicians get on TV and talk about how we just need to spend more and more, send all the weapons to Israel. And you kind of get this impression that there's some reason that you kind of feel that they're like not telling the whole story, that they're just like regurgitating someone else's narrative and you don't know why. You can tell they're not telling the whole truth, but you don't really know what it is. And it very well could be that many politicians in the US are being blackmailed by Israeli intelligence. And, that would really throw out everything we've been told for the last, few decades about, we have to support Israel because they're a democracy, they're our greatest ally. And it's like, actually, you were saying all that because you were being blackmailed for being a disgusting sex offender.
Yeah. Bunch of pedophiles, basically.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, you look at the list of the A-lists of people who Jeffrey Epstein had in his Rolodex coming on his, plane, his Lolita Express, including people like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and like prime ministers of Israel and Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz all the time, by the way. And the connections to intelligence. And I mean, it's honestly, it wouldn't be surprising. And the Israelis are quite effective in getting what they want. I mean, who knows? Maybe that's how the Mossad gets, CNN to write a headline in a different way. Maybe Wolf Blitzer, maybe Wolf Blitzer is either being blackmailed or is a part of the blackmailing operation. I mean, I'd believe it at this point. I mean, who knows? But there's plenty of evidence. I mean, I really encourage people to go check out the segment you did on this. You really do lay it out quite well. And I think it's amazing that Donald Trump is like, after basically trying to sort of dog whistle about Jeffrey Epstein, the way he does about other sort of like conspiracy theories to his base that's into that sort of thing, to now have him being like, it's not an important story, who cares? It's like, wow, dude, you are such a fraud. I mean, we know he's a fraud, but what a fraud. And I mean, maybe his base, or at least a part of it, will turn on him after this.
Yeah, it is so unbelievable. And that I think is the other reason we care, is because Donald Trump has had this sort of mystique or this hold over so many people in this country as he's an outsider, like he's going to get the deep state. And it's like, okay, if he was going to get the deep state, like why didn't he do it in his first term? But, people are like, okay, this time around, he's going to get him. And it's like, this is really sort of the crux in many people's eyes, of like, this is like the corruption in Washington or whatever. And this was such a big promise from the Trump campaign. Donald Trump Jr. talked about this. Dan Bongino talked about this. Donald Trump himself talked about this. All these different people were like, this is going to Kash Patel. It's going to be full release. Like all the secrets are coming out. And you see now that people in the Trump camp, people who are like devotees, like lifelong supporters of Donald Trump, are like, this is a bridge too far. And it's like, okay, you can say what you want about that. Okay, all the other stuff wasn't a bridge too far, but it really kind of takes the mask off. And I know it sounds a little ridiculous, but it really does kind of take the mask off, where people are starting to realize, okay, like this guy is not this deity. He is not the person he's claiming to be. And I think it already has led to a lot of people breaking away from his grip and breaking out of his orbit. And I think it can also lead to people sort of realizing a lot of other things about him. I mean, we talk about this on our program all the time, that Donald Trump is this fake populist. You know, he talks about, oh, we're going to make America great again. You know, the American manufacturing is going to come back. Like, you're never going to pay income taxes again. It's like, what about that? Like, he said, he actually said that we would never pay income taxes again because of the tariffs. You know, and then he goes and cuts taxes only for billionaires and cuts Medicaid for poor people. Like, it's just like, this guy's a total fraud. We've been saying this all along, and I hope, you know, if there are any Trump supporters watching this, you know, we're not, you know, watch.
You know what I think? You know what I think, and to those Trump supporters who are watching, I think that, you know what would be the best trick the deep state could play is to give everybody someone that the deep state chose.
Sorry, what's
Who's
that?
talking? The best trick the deep state could play would be to give everybody who's against the deep state a guy who's actually one of theirs.
Yeah.
But pretending not to be. But no, but in all seriousness, you know, the Trump phenomenon in some ways reminds me of, like, when I think about where liberals were at after George W. Bush, the Iraq War, incredibly unpopular. The state of politics was incredibly unpopular, 2008. And then you have this guy, this progressive seeming black guy, being like hope and change. And it's like, in that moment, it was the perfect, fraudulent way to suck all that energy that was against the war on terror, the Bush tax cuts, just all of the bullshit that happened under George W. Bush, to suck all that energy into something that was just another flavor of establishment, another flavor of empire. And you kind of see that with Trump on the right. Not that I'm saying the right is like anti-establishment, but obviously there was some element of, like, when Trump, one of the reasons he won the Republican primary back in 2016 was because he was shouting at everybody on stage about their role in voting for the Iraq War, or in voting for NAFTA. You know, with Hillary, when he was going up against Hillary Clinton, he made a big deal about Hillary Clinton and NAFTA. And he made himself seem like this, like, working class populist, which is what fascists do. But all that's to say, there was a strand of that in the base that supported him. And so he's like the Obama for the right, in a way, where he takes all that pent up energy that, you know, some of it's stupid energy, but some of it is misdirected anger at the wrong things, and just, you know, making himself seem like the answer when he's actually doing the opposite of everything he said he was going to do. It's sort of incredible. So anyways, I think that brings us to the end of this show. And you're welcome, everybody, for bringing you the truth about Jeffrey Epstein. And also, I need people to tell us in the comments how they felt about Kei and whether he should be killed off of Freedom Side Live or not. I like you. I don't want to kill you off, but, you know, it goes to the audience at the end of the day.
If the viewers demand it, I accept the outcome. I support the democracy of the comment section. So
that's really putting a lot of power in the hands of the viewers. But I appreciate that. Very democratic of you. But before we go, I want to remind people to make sure that you smash that like button. Make sure that you share this episode. There it is. Make sure that you share this episode with whoever and everyone. Share it with everyone. Doesn't matter who. But also make sure that you're subscribed to Breakthrough News on all social media platforms, including here at YouTube. But most importantly, do smash that like button. Helps boost us in the algorithm, which is not our friend these days. But also, if you support the work we do here at Breakthrough News, please consider becoming a member by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news, where for as little as $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you can be helping to materially support independent media in a moment when it's more crucial than ever. And on that note, Kei, thank you so much for being such a fantastic guest host. I hope to see you on here again, depending on what the audience says. And to all of our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning into the Freedom Side Live, and we'll see you next time.